questions on that. Anytime that we've got 10 people on here, you can go ahead and use the raise hand thing, but in a small group like this, that's just really not necessary. So the objective for tonight that we laid out last time was to talk a little bit about how social engineering works, not only for our organization, how we operate and do it ethically during penetration tests, but also how it looks in the real world. In the real world, when you get beyond those very, very rudimentary, very shady looking phishing emails and texts and calls that we all get inundated with all of the time, right? And there's a tremendous difference when you take that step up in sophistication. And unfortunately, for so many years now, people have been so used to seeing the terrible ones that are so obvious scams that it's in a way it's almost conditioned a lot of people to look for those obvious indicators of it being phishing. And things that look just a little bit more legit can sometimes slide under the radar when if you stop to really think about it, it shouldn't. Um, excuse me. So if anyone's seen any of our sample reports, you'll see that in the beginning we call out that our job is to replicate a advanced persistent threat of moderate sophistication. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we're trying to emulate to the best of our abilities a malicious hacking group intent on compromising and monetizing an attack. Meaning we're looking to be like Ryuk or DarkSide. What it does not mean is we're not the NSA, right? We're not a nation state. We don't have that kind of capabilities, and we're time bound, right? So we're not able to run social engineering ops that can take months or even years. We've got to come up with this ability to create sufficient pretext and launch multiple campaigns within just a few week time frame, which adds a layer of difficulty onto it. So some things that we keep track of as we go through our campaigns, obviously the goal is to gain access and either compromise a user account or many users accounts, or gain backdoor type of access to one of their workstations or systems. But along the way, there are many different layers in which things can either succeed or fail from the perspective of a blue team, whether we get all the way through to that level or not. So, for example, if we take probably the most commonly known about type of social engineering is through phishing, right? If I can get malicious links or malicious payloads, malicious instructions to an inbox, then there's, even if it doesn't trick anybody, just the fact that it got to their inbox and now it became on the onus being on the human to make the mistake, there's an area of improvement in tightening up your email security controls, right? There's more things that they could do. If it can get farther than that, and not only can it get to their inbox, but when they click on the link, nothing's blocking that link. Maybe nothing scanned it, maybe nothing flagged it as malicious. That's another step in the chain, right? Then if we can actually trick those people into putting in their usernames and passwords, that's another step. And then perhaps we can bypass their multi-factor authentication as well and improve the entire kill chain. So when we're doing it from our point of view, we really want to take care to capture the metrics and understand accurately what's happening at each step in that phase. And now last week, hey Andres, how you doing?
Hello.
Hey. So last week, a couple weeks ago, I'm sorry, when we looked at the MITRE ATT&CK matrix, that's like the big picture of how we go about emulating these malicious actors in a realistic way. And today we'll dive in a little bit more into a demonstration I've got of what we would do to set up a social engineering campaign. We're going to be impersonating QuickBooks and using a spoofed QuickBooks login portal. And I kind of walk you guys through the process of doing that. And I'll show you a tool called GoFish, which is really neat. It's a free tool written in Golang that is essentially it's just a web server that lets you capture credentials. It's really neat, easy to use. And we'll take a look at a few different spear phishing type of emails that I've staged already, so that you can see what it'll look like. I'll show you what it looks like sending it, and I'll show you what it looks like to the receiving end, so I've got 2 emails up here. And that way you'll kind of get an idea of what our clients are seeing when we're doing that type of engagement. Then a little bit right after that, we'll talk about some of the other types of social engineering that we've had good success with, doing that with SMS-based phishing. We'll do that with calendar injection and calendar jacking type attacks, which are a little bit lesser known, as well as voice phishing. Okay, so starting in here, I'll share one of these screens out. We'll start We'll start here on Google. So we're going to, the pretext of this demo is that we've done our reconnaissance and we've determined that the client that we're targeting, call it Astasnos Capital Management, is utilizing QuickBooks. And you might think like, how in the hell are you ever going to figure that out? And one of the things that we do, and this is not a reconnaissance class, but you can do a pretty simple Google dork and you pull up a bunch of job postings and actually see, and if their job postings have details in it, which most of them do, a lot of them will actually say specific stuff in it, like, look at this guy needs to work with QuickBooks Online. Now, I don't know what this organization is. That's not who we're targeting, but just as an example, things like people's LinkedIn pages that they work that are working there are easy to find. Go through there, see if anybody mentions their day-to-day familiarity with different services, software, third-party vendors, anything like that. Job postings are great, and sometimes you'll even see like business-to-business reviews or companies that let other companies put their logos on their websites. All that can be good information on who you might want to come as when you're doing any type of a reach out. Now, the next step, what we would do there, once we have a kind of a general idea of a possible way to go, is we need a domain to use. Now, we have a fairly robust library of different domains that we'll use for phishing, but sometimes we need to buy custom ones. And that's very easy to do on GoDaddy. You can just search something up. So if we search like QuickBooks, we'll see what's available. And really, this is just a form of typo squatting. We know it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to get past, a few eyes. And phishing like this, mass phishing or even spear phishing, it's really a numbers game. You're not going to trick everybody. It doesn't matter how good it is. You're looking for that 3 to 5, maybe 8% if you're really on fire, but 8% of 500 people, that's a lot of compromised accounts. But the domain that we actually already had purchased is this one right here, quick-books-online.com. So that's the one that we're going to be using both to host the phishing portal as well as to send out the domains. Now, as just a prep thing for this, I've already made a phishing portal based on them. I'll show you the real one and I'll show you the one that I made side by side. I also made an Office 365 account with this domain, no reply at quick-books-online.com. So that's like if you ever gotten an automated email from Microsoft or Spotify or anything like that, a lot of times it's like no reply and it'll say like this is not monitored and all that. So just a couple quick things on when you're setting up the domains. Email security controls were you raising your hand, Brandon? No, okay. Email security controls that people have in place like Mimecast, Proofpoint, Office 365, they have a lot of different things that they look at when they're determining if something is malicious, potentially malicious, or legitimate. And one of our primary challenges off the get-go is to make sure that we make these campaigns as legitimate looking as possible to those automated systems. Our first step is getting things to the inbox. So some things that we can do to aid in that is actually aging these domains. So whenever possible, if we can buy a domain a month, 2 months, 3 months ahead of time before we're going to use it, it has that time to have existed longer, right? Because believe it or not, they can actually tell if you bought the domain yesterday, and that automatically sets off some red flags with email security controls that it's really odd. Some other things that can be really helpful is adding in DMARC and DKIM, making sure SPF records are set up right. Now, none of that is particularly challenging to do. It's just another step that can help you a little bit. And another good habit that we get into and we do regularly is we'll use this really neat free site called MX Toolbox, which can do all kinds of stuff. But one of the things that it can do, it has actually a blacklist search. So we can put the domain in it and we can check against a number of different blacklists out there to see if anybody had reported this particular domain as malicious in the past. So especially if we're using a domain that we have used before on, maybe it's a really good one that we've used on multiple occasions with different customers in the past, there's always a chance that somebody on their blue team may have reported it as malicious because they thought it was malicious and they didn't know the penetration test was going on. That can happen. Sometimes if we've actually had ones before that were really, really good spoof domains of Microsoft stuff and Azure stuff that has been blacklisted and pretty much burned before we ever even used it. So it's a good thing to check, make sure that you're not on any known blacklist before you launch off a campaign, or else you might just be shooting yourself in the foot. Now, we'll take a look at the real portal. So this is the portal that we're going to make on Intuit's webpage, this guy here. And I will show you, I'll fast forward a little bit and show you this. This is the live phishing link. It is darn close. I'll just side by side it here. Well, the side by side kind of collapses this bit here, but a couple key differences is on this side, they've got, the real one has CAPTCHA. CAPTCHA is tied to the actual real domain on it. So when I copy these, when I spoof these HTML pages, I have to rip out their CAPTCHA and either replace it with my own, or I'll just put in some text that's not actually tied to anything, just claiming that the CAPTCHA is there. Another thing that they do a lot of times is they'll actually have a function in JavaScript to obfuscate the password when it's submitted. And in that case, if we don't get rid of that JavaScript, then it'll just come back to us in our phishing portal obfuscated, and it's a huge hassle. So it's a little bit more than just, copying all the HTML code, pasting it into your rendering site, and then rolling with it. Usually you have to do a little bit of fine tuning on most of them to have them in a functional state. But that's why this one is working, and I didn't try to do that for you guys live. So we will now take a look at, this is one of our pen boxes. So if you're not aware, when we're doing our penetration testing, we actually do them all from virtual machines that are in Microsoft Azure. The reason being is we're a fully remote company. I'm in North Dakota, Christian's in New Jersey, Mick's in Tennessee. And all of us at our homes, we have all different IP addresses, and they're dynamic and they can change all the time. But we want to make sure that when we're doing our engagements, we can tell the clients what IP addresses all this malicious looking traffic is going to come from. That way they don't freak out and think it's a real bad guy. So to control that, we have a block of static IP addresses in Microsoft, and that we are able to leverage with virtual machines in Azure. So that's why all of this is in this virtual box and not on my desktop. This here is GoFish, and it's a really neat interface. I'll walk you guys through that in just a second. But one thing I do want to call out on that phishing page that I had showed you is that it is actually served over HTTPS. We have a valid certificate on here. Now, that's not a requirement, but ethically, when we're doing this against live credentials of real people at our clients' companies, it would be very poor form for us, a security company, to then send those credentials over the internet in plain text, right? So we have to make sure that it's encrypted in transit. And to do that, we just generate our own TLS certs with a neat little tool called Certify the Web. It's free. They're not the most legit looking things, but they do function. They do work, and it is free to do. So previously, we would purchase them off of Microsoft, which can range anywhere from like $75 to $300 each domain, depending on if you need a wildcard or not. So this is another way to do it. Another thing that you can play with for free, and I'll drop the link here in a little bit. So the GoFish portal, and this is running in Windows. I believe it can run in Kali as well as Windows. We have found it always to be a little bit more reliable in Windows. You just need to have Golang. So the dashboard for GoFish here, it's broken up into what we have: campaigns, users, groups, email templates, landing pages, sending profiles. So if we look first at user groups, this is where you could put in your entire target list of everybody that you want to have a phishing email sent to. Now, there's a few different ways that you can go about getting that. There are email scrapers out there. You can enumerate users off of companies' LinkedIn pages. You can be a little creative with that. And this is going to send out those emails using SMTP. Now, an issue that we've identified in the past with that is that the way that the SMTP sends these emails typically on this particular program and many others often triggers the email security controls to catch it and block it almost immediately, largely because you've got so many emails coming at a fixed interval so super fast from the same domain that it looks obviously not like human heuristics. So we use this tool in a little bit of a different way than it was particularly intended. We actually only send we send this phishing email, a phishing link that GoPhish generates to one email address that we control. Then we copy and paste that out and stage our emails manually with that. And then we send it manually with a human-based algorithm, spacing out the sends on it. So for example, instead of having SMTP send out 500 emails in 10 seconds, we'll do, maybe one every 45 seconds for a minute or two. Then we'll speed it up. And then over the course of maybe 10 or 15 minutes, then we go into rapid fire. And we have found that to be a far more successful way of getting the emails to the inboxes. It also adds that human characteristic of being imperfect, right? They're not going to be all at the same interval, even if you time it. You're going to make mistakes, and it just makes it look a little bit more legit. On the email templates one, this is you can set up templates in here either in text or in HTML if you were going to craft your entire phishing email right in this platform and then have it sent out with SMTP. This is a way that you could do that. Again, this tool is a little bit limited. You do get what you pay for, and it's free. So we actually do that kind of staging manually, and I'll show you what the templates that I put together look like. A little bit more robust than we would be able to get in there. And the landing page is here. This is really the meat and potatoes of what GoPhish is really helpful at doing. You're able to create these landing pages two different ways. You can either use this import site function, which I'll show you here in just a second, or you can manually paste in some HTML that you've got. And then it's just a matter of toggling, capture the submitted data and capture the passwords. And then a cool function that has built right in here is that you can choose where you want the phishing link to redirect the user to after the submission. So that could be to a second page where then we're going to try to phish their MFA codes. It could be to a perpetual loading page if you just want to stall them. Or what I'm a little bit more prone to do is redirect them back to the real page, and a lot of times they won't even notice. It just depends on the scenario. If it is an MFA one, you might want to redirect them back to the MFA one, and they're like, "What did it not take?" We've done that before and had people put in the same MFA code 3 or 4 times just because they didn't know why it wasn't working. Just real quick, I'll show you that import function because it is pretty neat. If I go to like LifeLock login, I just need a portal to pull in. All right, that was weird. So right here, I can go to import site. I can paste that right in there. And I can hit the preview button. And this is what it was able to pull for me. And it's not anything particularly sophisticated. It's essentially just looking at, if you would go to view page source and look at the HTML in here, it's pretty much just making a copy of the same thing. I'm on the wrong page. That's why it wasn't working there. Right there. It's essentially just taking this HTML, copy and pasting it over and rendering it again. Now, an issue that you'll run into probably 75% of the time doing that is there'll be JavaScript in their HTML that is pointing to something you don't have access to, so it's not rendering right, or their CAPTCHA is elaborately tied into some more JavaScript that's loading other stuff. So when you start pulling out different components, things break pretty often. And again, you gotta massage it. So the import site is a nice jumping off point, but I find more now than even just last year, it's taking more and more effort to customize these pages as organizations presumably are just getting a little bit better at stopping malicious actors from doing this stuff. So, and we also have on here the sending profile. So this is just a function of it. This needs to be able to send an email in order to actually generate the link, or to send it if you were going to use SMTP. So it needs to have a valid email account that it can use. In this case, we just have it sent from one of our dummy accounts. to another one of our dummy accounts, it works just fine. So we have this campaign that is currently running, and if we click into this, we can get the results of it. So this shows you a neat little bar graph, and it shows you the what has happened on those particular links. This is all from obviously demoing it earlier. So if I, on this other page, were to go to that link and input some data, and hit sign in, you'll see it will redirect me to the real page. And then over here on my phishing portal, in pretty much real time, it'll say that data was submitted. I can click down, and I can see the email and the password that was submitted. And it's a very, very simple to use tool, but it can be very powerful in its application. So what we do here in this result ID is actually the same. This is all that just gets appended to the domain that you're using. So it's not really that difficult. So we take that phishing link, and then we can insert those into the phishing email templates that we created. So we'll take a look at those right now. Before I shift over into that, anyone have any questions on GoPhish or the setup or any of that process? Probably should ask for questions a couple more times.
Yeah, so this is Andres.
Yeah.
I have problems with my headset, so sorry for the audio. So do you find that it's more effective to try to capture credentials rather than execute some type of payload on users' computers?
Yes. Well,
Okay.
yes. Short answer, yes. If executing payloads, we have a very effective campaign for that. It's actually related to vishing, where we talk them through the process of downloading an executable that effectively gives us remote access to it. We have found it very challenging in recent times to get payloads reliably through email security controls that are able to be executed. I know that there have been a couple high-profile exploits that have come out recently around macros and other things like that. But typically, in the last year, 18 months, we have had more success with phishing portals for credentials than we have with payloads. Christian?
Thank you. I got just a little bit to add to that. So fantastic notes there, Travis. The reason why executing payloads can be a little bit more challenging, just think about it from a defense in depth approach. There's a lot more security controls that you need to be evasive and get around, right? So when it comes to stealing somebody's credentials, the most challenging security control that you usually get around is multi-factor authentication. But as we're already talking about here, you can socially engineer somebody to, approve a notification, right? Or put in a 6-digit OTP code, right? Or there are other attack vectors like with client domain hooking and proxy attacks, that kind of stuff, which are it's much easier to steal somebody's credentials and bypass MFA, believe it or not, than it is to, like, when you go to run a payload on somebody's computer, like, what's the architecture of the computer? Well, first off, what's the operating system? Is it Mac OS based? Is it Windows based? Right? I mean, there are not that many people you're socially engineering that run Linux, but nonetheless, right? And then what's the architecture of it? It can still vary, right? Maybe someone's opening something up on a phone versus a PC. Maybe they're opening up on a M1 Mac versus a Mac that's running an Intel processor, right? Then you have antivirus, EDR, all that kind of stuff. What Travis was just noting, when we do the phishing attacks and get people on the phone and we walk them through installing software on their computer, the software that we usually use is going to be tools that are almost always used by IT departments, right? So what we call RAT software, right? And probably our keystone that we love to use is what's called Screen Connect. It's also they rebranded it, call it ConnectWise Control. It's actually been used by malicious actors in the wild many, many times. It's featured in many, many different articles. So even though that works fantastic and it's awesome and we've had success with it comparatively, when you just look at the statistics of it compared to stealing somebody's credentials and getting past MFA, it still doesn't hold a candle to it. So, and then also when you steal somebody's credentials, once you get access to somebody's mailbox, there's so many other vectors, right? So like oh wait, do they have a QuickBooks account, right? Do they have an account on this site, right? Do they have an account on that site, right? So it's I think from a lateral movement standpoint, lateral movement's much easier through some of these mailbox and information systems, especially because there's so many software as a service and platform as a service things now compared to conventional lateral movement, which would be from jumping from a workstation, to maybe some server with a file share and that kind of stuff.
As well as persistence on that, because at this, when you're going out and you're doing these in mass, even if you trick somebody, the organization is gonna realize something is awry when the whole company got the same email, right? So and if you're running your executable base, you're in an immediate race against the clock to establish yourself some other better persistence before you get kicked out, right? Whereas when you compromise an email account, a lot of times there's long-lived access tokens where they might change their password, but did they close out all the sessions? Usually not. Or you might be able to grant yourself persistent access with a malicious OAuth third-party OAuth app. It just gives you a few more options.
Fantastic note there.
Any other question there? All
Yeah,
right.
got a couple real quick. So one actually rewinds back a little bit. So for Certify the Web, you mentioned they kind of have some janky looking certificates. Have you ever found those actually get like rejected by a system?
So they're not actually janky. So what it is this. So Certify the Web utilizes a certificate authority called Let's Encrypt. So Let's Encrypt was basically an initiative created, I want to say almost 8 years ago now, where the concept is why would people have to pay hundreds of dollars to create a certificate for their website so that it can accept HTTPS traffic and whatnot? That should be something that it should be available to anybody and everybody for free, right? So Let's Encrypt was this initiative that was initially created where anyone could basically say, hey, I own this domain. I can prove I own this domain. Can I get a certificate? They have a certificate issued to them, usually for a very small, limited time frame. So when you buy a certificate from, let's say, like GoDaddy or Komodo or something like that, usually it's for a year or 2 years or 3 years. You can get it for more, but you shouldn't. With Let's Encrypt, usually you use some type of a service that automatically checks in on a weekly or a monthly basis to renew the certificate. So the balance and trade-off with Let's Encrypt was basically, hey, it's free, but to prove that you own the domain, you're going to have to prove it very, very frequently because we don't want it to be abused by malicious actors. Gotcha. Unfortunately, malicious actors do abuse Let's Encrypt quite a bit, but still not enough where we have found at least any of our customers that we do pen testing and social engineering engagements against, where they have blocked Let's Encrypt as a legitimate certificate authority. Gotcha. So if you were, let's say, scoping out a website and seeing if it was, let's say, suspicious though, and it's using a Let's Encrypt certificate, it certainly makes it look a little bit more suspicious. It's either one, a really cheap company, or two, it's might be suspicious, or three, it might be a really intelligent company who at scale knows how to save money.
Gotcha. Okay.
Good question.
You can see that renewal thing outlined right here. So last renewal was today. I made it today. Expires, auto renews on, and here's the next. So it will automatically renew on here and just send me an email that it succeeded or failed.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, just also looking at any sort of failure vectors too. But actually, I think my second question, I can wait till tomorrow for actual work because just thinking about that.
I mean,
okay.
Sure. Free to shoot whenever, man.
Cool.
All righty. Well, we'll take a look at how we could leverage this in a campaign. So here is the mailbox for the no reply at QuickBooks Online. And we got a couple fairly generic, but a little bit more refined than your typical phishing email. So this one here is a automated alert letting James Creamer, the CFO of this company, know that a standard review of their process that sees that there's an issue with their account and they need to log in and verify information. This, of course, is masked. When you hover over, you can see it is slightly different, and that goes to the phishing portal. And we'll just send that one, and we'll look at what it looks like as it comes in on the back end. Here is a different approach to it with your classic malicious activity was detected on your account alert. Just cleaned up a little bit with your view recent history. Again, we'll take a look at that on the back end. And something neat that you can do very, very easily is, oh, that's the real one. I want to take the phishing one. Well, spoiled it. You can actually put it directly into a QR code for free almost immediately, and send that along. Now they can't scan that on their computer, but if you have a premise where they would be looking for a mobile app, or maybe a mobile app would be convenient, or it's an update for a mobile app, and they would use their phone anyway. We've actually had engagements in the past where their email security controls on the company workstations were phenomenally well locked down, and we were only able to compromise people because instead of using their lockdown computers on their workstations, they were actually using it on their phone. So that's a whole nother vector in there as well. And if you guys wanted to scan it, you're welcome to. I'll actually drop the phishing link here in the chat so you can see what it looks like as well. All right, now we'll pull up Jimmy's email on this other one and see how they come in. So the mobile app renders really nice. References their actual YouTube video for this particular app. Scan it. Looks like it'll come right in. This one here. I could have made this look a little bit better, sure, but I had to do 3 of these today for you guys, so. And the last one, this one is obviously a little bit more generic, just using one of their email signatures. If you look hard enough, especially a company that big, you can find example memos or anything or other notices that they put out, and you can imitate or just outright copy email signature blocks. Especially when the company's big enough to have pissed people off, and then there's like leaked memos on Reddit and all that. There's a lot of ways to get that particular information. Yeah, I'll take this. I'll drop this right in here for you guys just to take a gander at. And I'll leave this portal up for like maybe an hour after this. I'm not going to leave it up indefinitely because there's no need for that. But if you wanted to just take a look, you're more than welcome to. So before we talk about things like calendar jacking and vishing, and maybe even go into a good story of one of Blake's shining social engineering moves. Any questions on the phishing or spear phishing side? I know it's a very deep topic. I mean, you can get very, very elaborate. There's a lot of psychology to it. This was just sort of an example of what it can look like. Cameron.
So when you bring the cloud into it, does it change at all, or is it still basically the same approach?
You mean like cloud-based email versus on-premise email service? No,
Yeah.
not really a particular fact. I mean, it might change your approach of what campaigns you're using, but no, it doesn't really change the game.
Okay.
I would say, just off of that thought process, though, that one of the things to be aware of is that as the maturity of an organization grows, they're going to have more safeguards that you may not be aware of. And it may look like you established a foothold, but they have better detection controls and containment controls in place. So one of the things that we'll typically tell an organization to compromise an account is to implement something like possible travel detection, right? So you can implement possible travel detection for like Office 365 through Defender for Office 365, or they call it Defender ATP, and then Defender for cloud apps. And so what it'll see is it'll say like maybe the original user who actually in Los Angeles logged in via Los Angeles, and then all of a sudden you just logged in via some endpoint in New York, right? It detects that it's impossible for that person to have traveled that distance within a short time frame, and it'll generate a notification to the IT department security team for them to investigate and look at what's going on, right? So one of the things I would say that if someone was trying to do really sophisticated social engineering would be to think about your targets, where are they geographically located, and the exit node of your IP address. So your IP address Is it something that's in Azure US East? Is it in Azure US West, right? Or somewhere else, right? Having your exit node geographically as close as possible to the end user so that you do not set off impossible travel notifications.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem.
All right. So we'll touch on vishing next, and we'll just talk about a couple of our favorite campaign premises to go through. The first one would be impersonating their IT department on the phone. So this one is obviously predicated on being able to enumerate a bunch of phone numbers. Now, some companies have tons of employees directories on their websites, especially for like salespeople or insurance reps or anything like that. Sometimes it's very easy to find a whole bunch of numbers to call. Some places have automated phone systems where you call the main company number and you can either dial by name and use like the old style T9 texting with the numbers to type in somebody's name, or sometimes you can even say their name, or just or dial in random extensions and just, you know, who you get's who you get. And other times it takes a little bit more research, a little more digging in. With so many companies having a BYOD policy, or people just used to using their cell phones for that kind of a thing, it's actually stunningly easy to find people's cell phone numbers on like True People Search and other operations like that. But the premise for this one that we like to do is we will do a little bit of research on LinkedIn and figure out the name of somebody in their IT department who works help desk, somebody who, you know, maybe hasn't been there too long, or if it's a big enough company, it really doesn't matter. We're going to pick them out. We're going to grab a typo squatted domain that's very similar. Maybe we'll put tech in front of it, or support.astasnos.com, something like that. Like it could be the help desk's actual domain. And then we'll start calling up and we'll impersonate that person. And we'll say, hey, this is Kyle Elliott from IT. I know two first names. It's like Ricky Bobby. Anyway, so, you know, Danny, and we'll cite somebody that they would know, whether that be like the CTO or their boss or the head of security or something like that. We're like, yeah, Danny over the weekend pushed out a bunch of these updates for security patches, and it looks like your computer's just not checking in at all anymore. Do you have a couple minutes to work on this with me? And if you present it to them like casual, friendly, not like super in a rush, but like it's a pretty important, a lot of times people are willing to talk to you and they'll be like, oh yeah, okay, what do I have to do? I'm like, okay, cool. So can you just go to, you know, serviceit.screenconnect.com, and that's our third party vendor for managing this stuff. You're just gonna download this thing. I'll take a quick look and we'll have you on your way. And if you keep them on the phone, it's gonna be great. They download this executable. That's the Screen Connect client Christian was talking about. You walk them through. Okay, now open your file explorer. You go to your downloads folder. Do you see the thing that downloaded? Okay, double click that. All right. And then it'll say like your computer is being controlled by IT support or whatever generic thing we had. And it was like, okay, it just takes about 5 minutes to run this diagnostic. So while this happens, your screen's going to go black. Don't worry about it. It's totally normal. You're not going to lose anything on your desktop. This is a great time for a cup of coffee. And they're like, okay, thanks, Kyle. And one of the great features of Screen Connect is you can actually blank their monitor, but you can still see and operate everything. And during that time when they're gone, you have the opportunity to download a more persistent agent for Screen Connect for you know, to be able to access it later on. You can start sniffing through emails, anything else that might be open, and you've got yourself an initial foothold. And if you actually do, you know, after a few minutes, just give them their screen back, thank them for their time, a lot of times it goes unreported. And we've actually had times where this has worked and we've looked into our Screen Connect and like months after the engagement ended, you know, that client was still active and we've had to like, you know, reach out to him and be like, hey, guy, you want to clean that up for us? It looks pretty bad at this point. So it's not something that's really complicated. It's just a matter of projecting confidence. And, you know, sometimes people are gonna, you know, say no to you. Sometimes people are going to swear at you and, you know, tell you that, you know, find someone more gullible. And sometimes you will find someone more gullible. Another one that is we have been very effective with, especially Blake, is when we call up as somebody who works there, we call the IT help desk people complaining that we can't get into our account, and we try to talk them into changing the password for us. And now how this will typically go in one particularly memorable case that Blake actually wrote a great blog detailing. I'll post it in the chat right here. I'll give you the SparkNotes version of it. So we were doing social engineering against a very large company in the multi-billion-dollar revenue range, and we had identified one of their heads of, I can't remember if it was accounting or legal, or I think it was head of legal, and we had done a whole dossier on that particular person, and had like basically a targeting packet for Blake on different details and all that. So we had her call up the IT support. Yep, there it is. We had her call up the IT support help desk, and to make it even better, one of our favorite things to do to play mind games with the IT people is we have a 10-hour long video on YouTube of construction noises that we will play in speakers while we're on the phone. So it is immensely frustrating to talk to her. And these things tend to drag out for quite some time. So a combination of it's hard to hear, it's a challenging background noise, plus you're dealing with someone who is acting like they're fairly incompetent. The IT people is gonna give simple instructions like, well, just log in on your workstation. You're like, oh no, I don't have my workstation. I'm out at coffee. I'm using an iPad. There's always an excuse for something. You get them to the point where they just want to wrap it up. You want to say something, Christian?
I was going to say not necessarily incompetent, but VIPs tend to be they want to be treated differently than other folks, right? And so they will usually ask for exceptions, or they will usually act more as a simpleton in the mindset of an IT person. So you're generally correct in that regard, though.
Yeah, that was the other piece. We will pick somebody who is quite high up, not at the CEO, not something that would be overt, but high enough up that when they go and they say that they're about to head into a meeting, with the CEO, whatever, it's believable.
That last element is, for everyone else, pretext. So when you're going to be impersonating somebody, it's important that you do research about all the contacts that are associated with that individual. Who's their boss? Who are their direct reports, right? Who are their colleagues, right? This way, what you can do is you can say, hey, yeah, I need to get this report to Bob here and blah, 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 blah. You want to say, I'm going to get this report to the CEO, because that's not the relationship that exists with a senior legal executive and the CEO. They're usually in first name terms, right? So that's a really important thing to just keep in mind, is that you want to use that pretext initially where it's like, well, no, but Bob told me to do this, right? Or, well, my guys, I got to get, Robbie and Jack to be working on this here, and here. Okay. And I can't give them instructions if I'm not logged into Citrix right now. Okay. So like, can you please help me out with that? Or, well, I was talking to Jennifer, in IT, a couple of days ago, and she said she was going to do XYZ. Right. So if you do the research, usually it's going to be using things like LinkedIn, ZoomInfo, that kind of stuff. Right. Then that provides you a good backdrop and story that you can create around it. And make sure you collect all those details together in advance, like in a little document. So this way, if you need to make up a story on the fly, right? What do they call it, Mick? Improvising? If you need to improvise, you have details to quickly reference and improvise with, because if you're saying something quickly, it doesn't come off as lying.
Makes sense. Cameron, you have a question?
Yeah, so what is the average amount of days that y'all get to run a pen test for a company?
Pen test or social engineering?
Just like the full pen test.
Okay, so when we talk about pen testing, we're talking about looking at technical vulnerabilities and weaknesses, right? And exploiting those to gain a foothold into an organization and perform lateral movement. Social engineering is the same. It's just the other side of the coin, and it's doing it through human beings. So one of the things I'll actually note here, if Travis didn't hit on this earlier, is that like phishing assessments right, or end user security awareness assessments, right, are different than social engineering exercises, because a phishing assessment's all about measuring somebody's security awareness, right, and if you're going to prescribe additional training to them. While a social engineering exercise, once you gain access to something, you're performing obviously like additional lateral movement and, like we were talking about, persistence, that kind of stuff. That being said, when it comes to at least the social engineering engagements that we usually do, it's going to be at minimum 3 weeks, all the way up to usually 6 weeks, depending on the size of the organization, the amount of campaigns. Usually we're doing a minimum of 3 campaigns, usually a maximum of 6 campaigns.
You'll have a minimum time frame you go off of?
Yeah. So what we do is we try to give at least 3 days, like 3 business days before between each major campaign. The reason being is that if you have all the campaigns execute at the same time, right, or too close together, the end user security awareness is too heightened, right? If someone gets, spooked by the first campaign, they're going to immediately see the second and the third and that kind of stuff that follow very quickly. That being said, sometimes what we'll do is we'll actually use our own campaigns in tandem with one another in people's fearfulness. So one time what we did, or actually we've done this a couple times now, what we'll do is we'll have a social engineering campaign go out as if we're legal counsel or somebody like that, right? It's like, oh, hey, I can't access blah, 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 right? We have that email go out to a bunch of people, right? And then we'll have IT follow up and say, hey, everyone, we know that you saw this email, right? You can disregard that, right? And you can go here and here and here, right? Or again, it's essentially recognizing the previous thing was a phishing campaign, but we're coming from now in a place of authority saying, yeah, that was a phishing campaign. These are the actual next steps, even though it's a complete mindfuck, and we're advising them to do something that is malicious. So kind of going to the principles of social engineering, the obedience of authority. One of the campaigns we haven't done as much as of late is in the past, we used to do a lot of campaigns chained together where it would be like, you'd have like a help desk person reach out to everybody in the company, and we would have a fake CTO CC'd. It's the real CTO's name and all that kind of stuff, but it's at our fake domain, right? So we control the CTO's account, quote unquote, right? We'll have help desk reach out and say, hey, everybody, we're going to be making these changes to Citrix. Be sure to update such and such, blah, 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 right? And then what we'll do is we'll follow up like 15 minutes later or an hour later, or maybe the next day, and we'll say, hey, everyone, it's really important that you do this, by the way. Listen to Jamie and on the help desk team, okay? I need you to listen to him. And so when you do that, nobody realizes that you're just talking to yourself. They think that there's 2 different individuals, right, issuing directives, right, from a place of authority. But again, at least one campaign takes at least a week of like really good prep work, and then usually 2 to 4 days of execution work. Because if we're able to establish an initial foothold into something, then we're trying to, again, do persistence and lateral movement. So sometimes a campaign will just completely fall on its face right within the first hour, right? But sometimes it could go on for many days.
Mm-hmm. Just to finish up the story, then we'll open up just to some general questions with the time we've got left here. To support that legal exec, we bought a domain that was their domain, but instead of .com, we bought .legal for like $1. And then one of the things that Blake was saying to them is that she was able to access her, legal account, but she couldn't access her, that real company's domain account. And she had, over time, and this took like 2 hours, she convinced this IT guy to reset that executive's password and then email what he reset it to this external domain that we had set up, which was the .legal. And then Blake logged in, but she had MFA. So she said, oh, that MFA is to my old phone number. Can you just change it to my new one? And he did. He manually reset that poor lady's multi-factor authentication and then put Blake's cell phone in, and we were able to get in. And the access we got with that level of a senior executive was everything you would need for wire fraud immediately. So I mean, it can be a pretty devastating example of a lot of things going wrong at once. And there was a big learning moment for that organization. Certainly, they have a lot of different processes now. I bet next time that lady calls Linda, I'm sure someone will ask her for her employee ID number. There's been some improvements. But anywho, just to open it up before, if anyone's got any general questions, this would be a opportune time for it.
Yeah, so this is Andres.
Mhm.
So I'm assuming when you're first doing this, it's probably a little, I guess, I don't want to say frightening, but she mentions her heart is pounding. So does that act of social engineering people get easier with time?
No, not for
How
me.
is-
I'm actually a pretty introverted person. I really don't like talking on the phone at all. For some reason, video chatting is easier for me. Yeah, I'm super nervous every time I call, every single time.
Okay.
I fucking hate getting on on a phone with people. Actually, I get stage fright all the time, and I know this is probably actually new news for Mick. But yeah, I honestly every time I'm doing something like that, my heart pounds. Like when I call the fucking well, before there was apps for this, when I had to call the pizza guy and whatnot, I almost always made my wife call the pizza guy because it was just so challenging and difficult for me. So we'll actually be transparent with you. The reason why we kind of chose Blake is twofold. One, generally speaking, people do not associate in their mind, and this is a like preconceived notion, at least in Western culture, that women are not malicious, right? That there is no such thing as a woman hacker, right? Especially if she doesn't have any type of like hard accent or anything like that. Again, generally it's going to conform to some stereotypes in people's minds, be it if those stereotypes are wrong, right, whatever. Fact of the matter is it's a stereotype that exists in a lot of people's minds, unfortunately, right? So we can use that stereotype of women who seem like they're really kind and sweet are not malicious, right? So that's something that could be used against people and their soft spot. And then number two is honestly, Travis and I were complete fucking pussies, right? We didn't want to get on the call for ourselves, so we walked her through every step of it.
Thankfully, since then we've got a great guy on the team now, Dane, who perhaps you'll meet sometime. I've heard him live vishing people before, and he's like Howard Stern. He can tell anybody anything, and it's believable.
Well, certainly it's because he runs a podcast, though.
That's because he's a podcaster. That's right. Any other question, guys? It doesn't have to be on the social engineering topic.
Yeah, what would you say makes you stand out in a junior role to gain, I guess, your foothold in the industry?
Ooh, you know what? That's a fantastic question that I'm going to say that might be something we can hit on in the next session here. But if I was going to give just one tidbit in advance, one time that I was impressed seeing a resume is when someone embedded a encoded message in it. They put it at the bottom of their resume an encoded message, and they did it in a very simple encoding, but it was R07, and it was if you can read this, please hire me, or you can hire me, right? So I would say that when you go to have a resume get out there and that kind of stuff, it has to look good to a HR person who is usually keywording for particular descriptions, that kind of stuff, and they want to see something that's laid out pretty. And again, we'll talk about this more soon. And then there's the actual security hiring manager, right? They don't care about it looking pretty. They don't care about the keywords. They want to know that you actually know your shit, and they're going to test you on it. So the little thing I was just talking about, like embedding encoded phrases and things like that, they're going to like that. Or if you put your GitHub in there, right, they're going to like that, right? If they see what projects you're working on, they're going to like that type of stuff. That's the stuff that's going to impress them more. So those are going to be things that put you ahead of the curve. But I got a lot more good tips that I'd like to actually hit on in the near future here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to drop in the chat for you guys. I think let's open this up to a poll here of what we want to do for content next week, right? So give me one quick second. Let's see if this works out. Let's see if Microsoft Teams shits the bed. Nope. It shit the bed. Give me one second here. Okay, let me try one more time here. I'm going to do a Microsoft poll. I'm going to drop in the chat about what content we're going to hit on next week. So give me one second. Okay. I just dropped in the chat here for you guys. Doesn't look like it completely shit the bed. So, looks like we got folks already voting on this one here. That's excellent. So what content do we want to cover next week? So next week, I'll run with the meeting. I'll run the content. You guys let me know what we want to hit on here. And then what I'm also going to pop in the chat here is a little Microsoft form that we created. By the way, this isn't collecting who is actually responding. So I don't know, you know, who's responding with what. Honestly, I really don't give a fuck. But I'm going to drop in the chat here a Microsoft form that everyone can utilize. Okay. And this Microsoft form is feedback for us. So basically, there's a couple different questions. Feel free to let me know, by the way, if there's like spelling errors or if it can be improved or you get additional suggested like good questions to ask and whatnot. But number one, how would you rate the training content covered in regards to insight? So sometimes you could talk about something that might be too easy for most people, right? Or way too complex for other people, or might be in a good like Goldilocks zone, right? How would you rate the structure and content complexity of our session, right? So what that means is this, is that like sometimes we could have it where someone's talking off the cuff about something and everyone's picking their brains. Sometimes that's really good, but it can become sometimes overly disorganized and all over the place. Sometimes it's good to have a good agenda, right? Hit on particular items, have a little bit of time like so to, you know, do Q&A. But there's also times where people get it way, way too regimented, where they're just reading off slides, right? And it gets kind of boring and it becomes like a static lecture, right?
That's not a slam on you, Andres. We loved your slides.
Oh, no. Yeah. No, his shit was awesome. Yeah. Dude, your stuff was awesome. Absolutely awesome. And then we got 3. How would you rate just the overall quality of it? Again, you don't have to spit up our asses. It's perfectly fine. If it sucked, then let us know it sucked. And then what other things would you like to learn more about in upcoming training sessions? So we can use this inputs from you guys, right? So that we can hit on topics that are more relevant, engaging, and interesting to folks. And then lastly, do you have any other feedback or suggestions for us, tips, tricks, that kind of stuff? Like, hey, I learned about this other cool resource. I think you guys should talk about this, right? Or, oh, hey, you know what? I would love to talk about XYZ in the future if you guys give me the opportunity to talk about that thing, right? So we're always open to any type of suggestions, but every week we'll disseminate this form, right? Everyone will fill it out real quick, right? And then this way we can continuously improve this and grow it. What we hope to do again is create more agendas and content, easy like wiki references that people can utilize in the future, right? Have it easier for people to share this with, you know, other friends and colleagues and other people in the industry to jump in on these sessions so that we're just putting out more good and, you know, good in the world, but cybersecurity insight obviously in particular. Okay. Any questions or concerns?
Just with that, if you guys do have any friends or colleagues who are interested in joining it too, feel free to forward them the meeting link. If it won't let you, just shoot me their email and I'll add them to it directly.
Okie doke. It looks like, by the way, we got 5-2. So we got 5 folks voting to talk about IoT pen testing. Well, you guys are in luck because I do a lot of IoT stuff in my free time. I love working with microcontrollers. So that's going to be some real fun shit there. So awesome. Then with that, any last items here, guys? Questions, concerns, thoughts?
So where would you recommend to like learn more about the cloud?
The cloud.
Well, just like, I guess attacking the cloud. And as Travis said, you'd basically trained him on the cloud, so I would love to learn more about the cloud, basically how you taught him.
So I'm going to say this first and foremost. So it's a very the cloud. The reason why I kind of conventionally talk about that as something that's a very challenging and ambiguous term is because it's very, very wide scoping of what someone means by the cloud. Platform as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service. I'm going to assume that you're implying, though, that Azure, Google Cloud Compute, as well as AWS. So that's we're happy to have that as content that we could talk more about in the future. Travis, honestly, hey, he's like scratched the surface, and even myself have scratched the surface just slightly deeper, right? And I again, just being transparent here, Andreas's session last week, even I had the opportunity of learning a few like tips and tricks, that kind of stuff, right? So I don't have a definitive guide or set of resources, but that's something that we could start to compile together so that you have better a better roadmap for that. So, and honestly, Travis and myself have some more white box security assessments and cloud security or cloud assessment engagements coming up soon. So we're gonna have to aggregate that material together, even as part of like our daily jobs. So give us like a week and a half to start to get some more material together on that. Okay.
I know, Cameron, you weren't here last week. You were sick for, the topic last week was actually Andreas taught us a whole lot about Azure and different attack vectors against Azure. Andreas, would you be able to post those slides and that content up on GitHub or something somewhere that we could access it, or even just send it over to Cameron?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to sit for that exam this weekend or the following week. So if you don't mind, I'd like to maybe do an updated version and I can share that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's perfect.
That's awesome.
We'll record that too, because what we could do is we could build a library of these recordings, that kind of stuff. Assuming you're comfortable, obviously, with being recorded. If you're not, that's fine as well. Not a problem.
That's good. Yeah, I want to get that comfort level. Like I mentioned last time, I'm not all that comfortable speaking in front of people, but I know that I need to get better at it.
Well, certainly, you're trudging along and doing a good job. So no worries, man. So, Steve, any last items there?
All right, gentlemen. Well, have a great week then, and we'll be excited to learn about IoT pen testing next week.
Thanks, Steve. Bye now.
Thanks for your time, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay.